God's grace, we are doing well.
We pray for empowerment from above.
Sure.
We pray for empowerment from above.
Yeah, we need it.
Over to you, sir.
Right. Good morning to our charity listeners, especially level 200 students pursuing the course EDC 232, Principles and Practice of Teaching. And so this morning, I am here to take you through an important topic, preparing and planning to teach, factors to consider. In other words, factors to consider when preparing and planning to teach. In fact, today the numbers will be activated earlier so that we interact more. And so the number that you need to keep is 050-392-3158. And this particular number, 050-392-3158, will be the number for WhatsApp, SMS. So kindly take note of it, and then when it is activated, you get through to us. Right. And so this morning, I expect that by the time we are done with this interaction, you'll be able to identify 10 factors to consider when preparing and planning to teach. In fact, the 10 is minimum. So I will say at least 10 factors to consider when preparing and planning to teach. It looks too much, 10 factors, but they are more than that. This tells you that teaching is an endeavor that you don't just get up to go and start. There are a lot of things that are done at the background. Just like when you listen to a radio program or you watch a television, the only thing we see is the outcome. But there are a lot of things done at the background to give us what we've been hearing and enjoying on the radio and the television. And so the teacher too, before you go to class, there are so many things that you do, you consider and plan before going to class to teach. And so I expect that you'll be able to identify at least 10 factors to consider when preparing and planning to teach. That is not all. It is not just about identifying them, but I expect that you'll be able to justify any factor you consider important to be considered before going to class to teach. Right. So when we are done, ask yourself, what are the factors to consider and what are the justification for considering them? Right. If you have just joined us, this is Radio Windy Bay 98.3 FM, and we are having radio lecture for the course EDC 232, Principles and Practice of Teaching. I said the number that you will get to us and interact is 050-392-3158. Thank you. So we'll start. Now, before you go to class, it doesn't matter whether you've been teaching that subject for years or you have just started teaching or you are now going to class to teach it. No matter the case, you must always prepare before going to class to teach. That preparation renews you and gives you more confidence and agility to enter the class with your head up, with joy and happiness to go and convince and interact with your learners to be able to acquire the content. The happiest teachers in the classrooms are those who prepared very well before going. They don't fear, they don't expect to be ambushed by any foreign question. Because they are prepared, they are up and doing, and they can respond to any question, whatever the case may be. Right. So, what is the first factor to consider when preparing and planning to teach? The first factor is that you have to consider learners and their entry characteristics. Learners and their entry characteristics is the first factor. So, again, whether you have met those students before or not, whenever you are going to teach a group of students, the first thing that will come into your mind will be the learners and their features, what we call entry characteristics, being their age or their maturity. Don't forget, we always say that maturity has something to do with age. And so, if you are going to class, what you are preparing to go and teach, the first thing you consider, which is the entry characteristics, the learners and the entry characteristics, you must consider the age of the learners, because that will determine the level that you are going to engage in, and the impact you want to make, the duration, among other things. So their maturity is very important. Psychologically, it has something to do with human development learning, because at a certain age, certain things cannot be done and certain things cannot be conceived. So before you go to class, you must consider the age or the maturity level of your learners, so that you don't go beyond them and you also go to below them, right? In addition to the learners and their entry characteristics, you consider their current level. What is the current level? So this is, I'm going to class 2 or JHS 3 or SHS 2, SHS 1. We are in the second semester or second term, and we are in the third week. Where are we now? You see? So that with this, you know where to continue, because the principles and practice, the principles of teaching we looked at earlier, says that teaching is done from known to unknown, from near to far, from concrete to abstract. And therefore, you must know the current level of the learner. That is, the prior knowledge, or what the learner already knows, or what the learner you perceive the learner not to know. You must have this, and it is based on this that you prepare. In addition to the learners and their entry characteristics, you also consider their cultural background, because cultural background of the learner could influence the absorption or the acceptance of what you are going to do in the class. It could impede or facilitate understanding, and therefore you must always consider the cultural background, where the child is coming from, the influences. You must understand all these things and consider them in your planning. Then another important factor under the learners and their entry characteristics as a major factor to consider, the first factor to consider, is learning style, the learner's learning styles. Every teacher, you must know the way your learners learn and teach as such. So good teachers are supposed to teach the way their learners learn. Yes, you have to adjust your teaching to suit the way your learners learn. It is not always the case that you must adjust the learners to suit your teaching. No. Your teaching is to be dependent on the learners' learning styles. That doesn't mean that you should go and underrate or you should go and lower standards. No. But you are going to class with the intention to make impact. You must go with the understanding of the deficiencies of the learner, the opportunities the learner has to facilitate your teaching. And so the learner's learning styles are supposed to be acknowledged and considered when preparing to go and teach. How do you know the learner's learning styles? If you have been in that class with them, it is easy to tell. So easy to tell. So you can just, you should be able to tell, because you have been with them and you can study the way they learn. Every learner, you know how they are able to absorb. Then, if you have not met them before, it's your first time of meeting them, we shouldn't forget that your first time of going to a particular class, especially those of you going to do your internship, the first day you enter a class should not be the day you are going to teach. In fact, your first time of meeting the students should be your familiarity activity with them. You are going to interact with them to know where they have got to, their names, what interests them, which subjects they like, the subject they like, which aspect. Then you dovetail it to your subject. In the subject, I'm going to say geography. Which aspect of geography do you like so much? You see, when you begin doing this, you begin to understand their areas of interest, their areas of difficulty, and you also, based on that, to shape what you'll be teaching the next time you meet them. And so this activity will help you to know their learning styles. Right. So that is the first thing you need to consider. Learners and their entry characteristics. It is important so that you can build your concept on that. Right. The second factor to consider is the subject you are going to teach. You see, every subject has its own myths. People have myths about the subject. They have their own perceptions. They have their own biases. And so before you go to class to teach a concept, don't forget the concept you are going to teach. Maybe you are going to teach ICT. But that day, the topic we are going to teach is not purely ICT, but it's about the ethics of ICT, what we call etiquette of the internet or the IT. That is not necessarily ICT, but it is etiquettes. This implies that what you are going to teach, you may have to find out whether learners have some myths and biases, some perceptions about ethics. Right? You need to consider all these things. And that is why I said that if you have not met the students before, you should engage them first and understand these things, their feelings about the subjects, the areas they don't like, the areas they like. You yourself as a teacher, we'll talk about you as a factor. There are areas that you may not like so much to teach. It may be either boring or too difficult or something like that. But the subject that you are going to teach, you must consider its ways of inquiry. Every subject has its ways of inquiry and the way it is taught. And that is why we teach you the knowledge required to teach. And we made mention of pedagogical content knowledge. That is the knowledge required to teach a particular subject. The methods of teaching a particular subject that is specific to that subject. And so when you consider the subject, it is a way of also considering this pedagogical content knowledge. Right. The subject itself also has its ways of assessment. And so in considering the subject, you also consider how assessment is done in that particular subject area. Yes, the history of the subject that the student may have, the topic we are going to teach, it's all there. So it is important to consider the subject, right? So I made mention of the first one being learners and their entry characteristics. Then after that, you consider the subject, right? Now let's take the third factor. The third factor is the topic and the lesson objectives. Two things in one. The topic and the lesson objectives. Right. So after considering the learners and entry characteristics and the subject, the next thing you may have to look at is the topic. You see that the topic sometimes could be intriguing, interesting, or problematic. If you have been a teacher for a while, you will see that there are some topics students don't like. There are some topics when you raise it, students are so excited, then they don't want you to go. You must understand this topic very well and the way learners take it before you go to class. Other than that, if the topic is too interesting, you may go and the learners will be so much interested that your time will not be enough, and that will not make a good teacher. If the topic is not straightforward and requires much intervention from you, you must prepare for it. And so the topic you cannot just get up from bed, then today what am I going to teach? After all, I know everything. Then you go and stand in class, you ask them, what do you have today? Then you say, we have etymology. Okay, then you start. No. You don't have, in fact, no matter how long you have been teaching, you don't have that ability to excel, because that day, the topic that you need to go and teach, you must consider how learners take them, and you yourself, how you take it, right? And from there, in addition to that, is the lesson objectives. You must clearly set your lesson objectives before going to class to teach. So again, I'm emphasizing that no matter how brilliant you are, you cannot get up and enter the high school classroom, the basic school classroom, to go and teach. Even the university level, we don't do that. You get up, go through, even if you know, no matter how much you know, you must go through and set your objectives. I have been coming here to teach this topic for about, I think this is my second time of handling this topic on this radio. And even my coming this morning, I have to go through and look at what I'm going to treat. Yes, the issues I'm going to talk about are not strange to me, but I must go through them so that I don't come here and say things that are not appropriate. So, and I must set my objectives that I want to achieve this by the end of the 1 hour radio interaction. So, the lesson objectives are very important. You state them and you know the criteria for stating lesson objectives. They must be SMART. You all took EDC 111 in level 100, and so we expect that you know what we mean by SMART. SMART, the criteria for setting objectives. The objectives must be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. What this means is that you cannot just get up and go and start teaching. You must have the objectives clearly stated and your strategy to go and achieve them. Right. So, this is Radio Windy Bay 98.3 FM, and we are having radio lecture for the course EDC 232 Principles and Practice of Teaching. And this morning we are looking at preparing and planning to teach factors to consider. Right. The number is 0503923158. WhatsApp, text messages, could bring them. Right. Now, so we have dealt with learners and the entry characteristics. We have looked at the subject as a factor to consider. And then we have also looked at the topic and the lesson objectives. Right. So we now go to the fourth, which has to do with the curriculum standards and the core competencies. The curriculum standards and the core competencies. All this while, until the coming of this new standard-based curriculum, when you are going to teach, you didn't have to worry yourself with anything called curriculum standards and core competencies, because we didn't have it obviously stated in the curriculum. But it has come to the point where there's a need to consciously have it stated, and you have reason for stating them or having them considered before going to class to teach, especially the core competencies. And so the national, or what we call, sometimes we say the state standards. We have standards, national standards, the national standards for teaching. So you remember we have the teaching, the domains of the national teaching standards, for professional values and attitudes, professional practice, professional knowledge, and what constitutes each of them. You need them. You need to consider them before going to class. Other than that, you may go and your teaching may not conform to the required standards of teaching. Then, you must also look at the core competencies. What are the core competencies? I believe you all went through level 100, and so you took the course EDC 111. And therefore, the core competencies are treated there. Yes, we have critical thinking and problem solving, communication and collaboration, personal development and leadership, creativity and innovation, cultural identity and global citizenship, digital literacy. These 6 core competencies are the standards that we expect you to achieve with your lesson. So, in considering your topic and your objectives, especially your objectives, which of these 6 core competencies is your topic going to unravel? Which of these 6 core competencies are your objectives going to deal with? In your learning plan, you must state them clearly there. And so you cannot just get up and go to class without planning this and without considering this. You might say that, well, every topic that you treat, after all, there will be an element of critical thinking and problem solving. That's fine. But what about digital literacy? What about cultural identity and global citizenship? What about communication and collaboration? You need to consider all this because they will also influence the kind of strategies and methods you use to teach. Right. Beyond this, you must also consider institutional standards. Apart from the national standards, you must consider institutional standards. So, you are teaching in a particular school. That school has its own home tradition. It has its home culture, how it does its things, its recommended ways of teaching within the classroom. And so you cannot just up and go to the classroom and begin doing your teaching. No. You must consider certain standards, medium of expression indicated to be used in that school, in that class, and at that particular time of the subject that you are teaching. Because if you are going to class and your topic or your subject is the Akan language or any of the languages in Ghana, you are not likely going to be using English. You are expected to use the local language to teach that particular local language, right? So you should not be seen using any other language or in treating the topic, right? You need to perhaps sometimes integrate the official language with the local language to help the learners understand very well. The standards of every school, the practices of every school should be reconsidered, reflected upon when you are going to class to teach. Otherwise, you will go to class and say some things that you are not ready to defend. Right. So we have mentioned learners and their entry characteristics as one of the factors, the subject, the topic and the lesson objectives, and then curriculum standards and the core competencies. At this stage, we'll activate the telephone line so that you may phone through and then we have a discussion. Right.
This is Radio Windy Bay 98.3 FM. Follow us on our various social media handles. On Facebook is Radio Windy Bay 98.3 FM or Instagram Radio Windy Bay 98.3 FM. Twitter at Windy Bay 983 FM. YouTube is Radio Windy Bay 98.3 FM. WhatsApp and text us on 05
So we are still waiting for your calls, your messages, and you use 05039233158. Send your WhatsApp message and SMS. You can also watch us live on www.uew.edu.gh. We are also on Radio Windy Bay 98.3 FM on Facebook. And so kindly get in touch and let's interact.
On the frequency 98.3.
Right. So whilst we are still waiting for the messages and your calls through 05039233158, Radio Windy Bay 98.3 FM on Facebook, we will continue with the rest of the factors to consider. Right. So the next factor is time or duration of the lesson. You should have full knowledge of the time available for your lesson. In fact, the time for instruction, the time for practice, the time for assessment, the time for review, the time for reflection. You need this specified, and you should have it at the back of your mind before going to class. Why do you need to know this? Don't forget, we are working with time, and the class, perhaps at the SHS classroom, it is subject teaching, and so you cannot go and use somebody's time. Once the bell or the siren goes, you have to exit the class, and you must not exit a class unprepared. You should prepare the learners, their mind psychologically, to exit the class, so that you don't leave learners either tensed or not well closed, the lesson not well closed before leaving. That is not done. It is not a good way of teaching, and so you must fully prepare for the time. You must specify the time for your introduction, the time for your what we call the main, that is the activities, the instruction itself. You may also have to prepare for the practice. After teaching or delivering the content, there should be a time for them to practice, where you assess to see whether you have attained your objectives with the learners. And then there should be a time for reflection, what is now called plenary in the learning planning. You need that. You need to also consider the season. In fact, the time or duration of the lesson also include the season of the year where you are. For example, right now in Winneba, it is drizzling. We are in July. And so if you have a lesson in the morning, first lesson, you should perhaps expect some level of lateness. You should expect learners coming in shivering. You should expect some learners not prepared when they enter the class. And so these things must be considered so that you know how to handle them very well to aid your teaching. Other than that, your teaching may not be fruitful. And so it's very important that you consider all these things. The next thing you need to consider is the classroom environment. So that is another factor to consider. Apart from time duration of the lesson, you need to look at classroom environment. The classroom environment is said to be the most dynamic environment in the teaching profession, in the teaching environment. The classroom, you can prepare and plan all right, but you will get to the classroom and meet surprises. And that is why if you don't prepare, it will be worse. But if you prepare, then you have a way of managing it, because you have put in some measures to deal with the unforeseen circumstances that might come. Right. So you need to consider the class size. So you see that in preparing your lesson note or lesson learning plan, you state clearly the class size. It is part of considering the classroom environment. The class size is considered as part of the classroom environment because if the class size is large, you know that you may not be able to use certain techniques of teaching. If the class size is large, you cannot do some groupings. You may have a certain number of groups depending on the class size. And the number of people who constitute each group also depends on the class size. The effectiveness of the class sometimes depends on the class size. Your ability to control and manage the class depends on the class size also. So you need to always consider the class size in your consideration of the classroom environment. Then the seating arrangement is also important. That is part of the classroom environment consideration. The seating arrangement could facilitate your teaching or impede your teaching. It could enhance learners' understanding or limit learners' understanding. The classroom arrangement, in terms of seating arrangement, is important for your learners. Some have short sight, some they may have other physical challenges that requires them to sit in front. Have you thought of it? Some learners prefer to sit at the back all the time. That if you move them from the back and bring them to the front, because of that day, the lesson you are going to treat, you feel that no, for today, you should come forward because of the lesson I'm going to treat. How will that impact the learner? And how will that influence your teaching? You must consider all these things. The classroom ventilation, very important. If the classroom is not well ventilated, the agitation, the irritation can impede your teaching. You yourself, you may be sweating, having some difficulties, and that alone may be misconstrued as you not on top of your topic or concept. And so the ventilation is very important. Learners must have very good classroom. The airy nature of the classroom should be apt so that you don't just get the students stifled with poor classroom ventilation. It doesn't help. Then the next thing that you need to consider as part of the classroom environment is special needs. Special needs. Don't forget that now we are preaching inclusive education, and the classroom has varied kinds of people with various kinds of special needs, difficulties, and special abilities. So you have exceptional students in a class who are so good, they are so brilliant that sometimes we call them sharks. Such students, if you don't manage them well, they may throw your lesson out of gear. So you must consider and remember that you have those students in the class that you are going to meet before you even go to the class to teach them. Apart from the sharks, we also have the dolphins. Yeah, those who are neither sharks nor something that I normally say they are not more money. they are good, but they need to be pushed. They need to be engaged. They are not the sharks. They are not that good, but then they need to be pushed to be able to come up with their abilities. You must also consider them, right? Then those that that they have so much challenges that they are not able to follow most of the lessons. What do you do to help them? These people must be considered. You may also have those who are visually impaired, those who are physically challenged, those who may be hearing impaired, and so you may need an interpreter. Have you considered bringing the interpreter? Is the interpreter ready to be in a class with you that day? All these things must be considered. It is not good for you to enter the class before the interpreter comes. In fact, this thing I'm saying, I am violating it right now, because I'm supposed to have an interpreter right now that I am teaching, so that the special learners will also be engaged. Unfortunately, they are not here. How do we get them for the special learners to also be engaged? So I have violated that here, and I'm very sorry for that. It is not something that is to be acceptable. Right. So the classroom environment does not only include what I've just mentioned. In fact, it includes the emotional environment. You don't need to, you see, your classroom should not be tensed. You make your class tense, you impede your delivery. It will come against you. It will come against the next teacher who is to come. And so it includes the classroom environment consideration. Right. The next thing you need to consider is the teaching and learning materials or resources. Teaching learning materials or resources. We just spoke about special needs. So you need to consider some of the things you must take to class to be able to do differentiated assessment, varied teaching techniques, and all that you need. In fact, the teaching resources do not only include you, the teacher, but includes any other material or resource that needs to be used to implement your lesson for that day. You may have to invite a resource person. Now, if you are inviting a resource person, what orientation have you given to a resource person? You don't just invite a teacher, maybe a colleague teacher who is endowed in a particular culture or something, to come to your class to explain things or to interact with your learners when you have not taken the teacher through what to do and what not to do and some of the things to consider. So what I'm saying is that you don't bring in a resource person impromptu. You don't do that. You prepare them. So that is why you need to consider. You need to prepare them before bringing them to the class. Your TLMs must be apt and used at the appropriate time. The next thing you need to consider is your methods, your techniques, and your strategies. Methods, techniques, and strategies. Upon all that we have said so far, you can never deliver your lesson if you don't use the appropriate methods. And here we are calling for learner-centered methods and techniques. You need to ensure that you bring in varied techniques to cater for individual differences. That is, you ensure inclusivity in your lesson through your techniques and your methods. Right from your lesson introduction to the plenary, you need to ensure that you have engaged all learners through your methods, techniques, and strategies. Again, here you must remember that that particular subject you are going to teach has a way of teaching. That particular topic you are going to teach has a way of teaching it effectively. Have you considered that? Have you considered any other way by which you can help other learners who may be struggling or may be too experienced and therefore are likely to throw your lesson out of gear? You need to consider all these things. Again, the last but one factor that I have here that you need to consider has to do with the assessment procedure to be used. The assessment procedure to be used. You need to consider how you are going to check to see that indeed you have achieved your lesson objectives. So both formative and summative assessment procedures must be employed in your class, especially formative assessment. Sometimes time may not allow you to do a good summative assessment, but as for formative assessment, it is part and parcel of teaching. In fact, formative assessment could sometimes be used as a method or a technique of teaching, because you can use formative assessment as a method of teaching, a technique to get the concept to your learners. Have you prepared for that? FM. Have you considered the questions you ask? Yes, it is true that in a classroom, questions can come up spontaneously. But if you prepare well, the spontaneity with which questions will come will be better, and the quality of the questions that will come spontaneously will be better than if you don't prepare. Right. So assessment procedure is very important. And right now at the high school, they are employing varied techniques to assess learners, like individual class work. They have 6 modes of assessment, and you must consider which one you are going to employ that day: individual class work, individual portfolio, practical performance, group project, individual project, and then you can have any other, like that one will be maybe summative, the mid-semester and the end of semester. You need to consider all these things in your teaching before you even go to the classroom to teach. In your preparation, you need to consider all these before you go to class to teach. Right. Then the final one that I have here, not the least, though, is the teacher's strengths and weakness. And there is reason for which it has been put as last year, though it's not the least. It is here as last because you, the teacher, you should recognize your strengths and your weaknesses. Other than that, you go to class and it is not only the sharks or the brilliant students who can throw your lesson out of GA, but those who may not be following and those who may not be good enough, they can also throw your lesson out of GA because they may be asking questions that have already been answered or have been treated already in maybe the previous class or the previous lesson. Right. So the teacher, you must consider your strength and weakness. However, it is put last here because, you see, you, the teacher, you have been trained for a considerable number of years. You are experienced, far knowledgeable in the content, perhaps, than your learners. So it should not happen that you are going to class with content and methodological challenges. It is not done. It shouldn't be done. It is not a good way of teaching. You must have the standards of teaching in your mind, that your ability to teach is part of the standards you must adhere to. And so you, the teacher, even though we have your strength and weakness as a factor you must consider, please don't take that as an opportunity to say that this I can't teach, this I don't know, or you are afraid, you are worried about the questions that may come because this area is gray, this area you are not that on top. No, you should be on top of the topic. That is why you must prepare, learn it well, check the way you are going to teach it. If possible, discuss it with a colleague who can enhance your preparation. Have you also thought of, as part of your strengths and weaknesses, your emotions? The teacher's emotions is important for the delivery of the lesson that day. So before you go to class, check your emotions, check your mood. In your preparation, check that. Well, just before you enter the class, your mood can change. Something can happen and your emotions can change. However, just like we've been watching on the television, we've been listening to Sir Bright, it is as if Sir Bright doesn't have any problem in this world. But you see, that is how teachers are supposed to also behave. No matter the challenge you are going through in your family, in your workplace, or any other circles, that should not affect, obviously, the way you go to class to teach. And the learners should not see it. You must behave like the newscaster, the television newscaster, who comes to give the news as if he has no problem. So happy, laughing. Yes. And you do that to carry your learners along so that they will be able to follow your lesson. That is, the classroom is not a place to go and share your difficulties. The classroom is not a place to go and share your worries. No. It is a place to get learners to learn the content and achieve your lesson objectives. So emotional intelligence is a very important factor to consider when you're going to teach. Have you checked your triggers? Maybe there's a particular learner in the classroom that always annoys you. Have you thought of how you are going to manage that day? Is it because that student have been asking you questions too much and so you get agitated? Or is it because the classroom, anytime you finish teaching any question, they say no question and you are worried? If you ask your questions well, your learners will speak. If your integrity is up there, your learners will speak. If you have not done anything that inhibits your learners' or ability to come out to speak, they will speak. And so check your moods, check your emotions, check your interests, check your weaknesses and your strengths before you enter the class to teach. And it's an important factor to consider in preparing and planning to go and teach. Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, so soon we have come to the end of today's interaction for the course EDC 232 Principles and Practice of Teaching. We looked at preparing and planning to teach, factors to consider. And we have gone through a number of them. We said you must consider learners and their entry characteristics. You must consider the subject. You must consider the topic and the lesson objectives. You must consider the standards and the core competencies. You must consider the time or the duration of the lesson. You must consider the classroom environment, including the class size, the seating arrangement, ventilation, special needs, and so on. You must consider teaching and learning materials and resources. You must consider teaching methods, techniques, and strategies. You must consider assessment procedure to be used, both formative and summative. You must consider, finally, your strengths and weaknesses, your emotions, your mood, and make sure that you are able to control them very well. You are able to manage them before entering the class, so that your personal features or characteristics that day with respect to your emotions and mood will not inhibit effective learning. Thank you very much. I believe that if you are listening and you have questions, contributions, maybe you want to clarify something or you want to correct me, you have the opportunity to do so. Yes, 050-392-3158. In the next few minutes, we'll be leaving here. And so kindly do so.
This is Radio Windy Bay. Windy Bay 98.3 FM.
Windy Bay 98.3 FM.
Department or but that is okay. So Grebenyako says, please, I want deep explanation on formative and summative assessment. Or I want, that is it. Formative and summative assessment. I believe that you are in level 200, and if you are in level 200, I am not surprised that you are looking for deep explanation, because you have the shallow explanation already. You have it already because you went through the course EDC 111. But if you want deep explanation, the time left may not permit it. So I will give you an explanation. Maybe when we meet in class, we give you the deeper one. The formative assessment is the assessment that you use whilst you are teaching, in the course of your teaching. It is formative. It is diagnostic. It is to help you to know whether learners are following your lesson, whether your lesson, the speed, the objectives are being achieved as you are teaching. Because you set out to achieve your objectives in the course of the lesson. So you say by the end of the lesson, not at the end. So in the course of your teaching, you want to see whether learners are following. Learners, whether your pacing is enough, whether your interaction is good, whether learners are really understanding. So that is formative. And it can also be used to teach the content. You can set multiple choice questions, right? And in your teaching, you can be integrating the solving of the multiple choice questions in your teaching. And that can help to concretize what you are teaching. So it means that formative assessment can also be used as a teaching technique, right? But the formative is not used to grade the learner. The formative is not used to grade the learner. It is diagnostic. And normally I have a very good way to explain formative assessment and summative assessment. You know, when you have a chef and a customer, when a chef tastes the food and when the customer tastes the food, they don't have the same purpose. They don't have the same rationale for tasting the food. When the chef tastes the food, he or she is tasting the food because he wants to check whether everything is in order. Right? He wants to check whether he needs more salt, more sugar, more pepper, or more spice, any other spices. You see, that time the food is not ready. It is still in the course of preparation. It is still in the course of being prepared. So it is in the process, and that is where the chef will taste the food. The chef will not taste the food when it is on the table before the customer or the one eating the food. No. Good. So that is the situation for formative assessment engaged by the teacher in the course of teaching. But summative assessment is likened to the customer tasting the food. At the point of the eater tasting the food, it is not to check whether you should, in fact, it is to judge. That time of tasting is for judgment, is for evaluation, to check whether in all this food is it nice or to judge. Right? So when you are teaching, the teacher finally can judge the effectiveness of the teaching or the effectiveness of the achievement of the lesson objectives by giving questions to conclude on the learner's performance. And this conclusion could be used to grade the learner, to contribute to the grading of the learner. That is summative. That is summative. And so, Gabriel, the formative is diagnostic. It is what we call assessment for learning. It is for learning. But summative is assessment of learning. Assessment of learning to check whether learning has taken place and to grade the learner, to contribute to the grading of the learner. When we meet in class, we'll throw more light on this. Thank you very much, Gabriel. Right. Yeah. So, yes, there is some message from another person. He is commending the lecture, and that is good. Thank you very much. And it is from Adam Lucy. Adam Lucy, thank you very much for your compliment. Right. So, at this stage, I must say that I am done, and thank you very much, all of you, for listening through this period. I believe that if you have any further question when we meet in class, you bring them up so that we discuss them. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.